Hi, hope you're well. Just a quick thought for Succos. And suitably enough, here I am inside our very own sukkah. Wanted to address an interesting anomaly in Jewish law relating to sukkah, and that is what we call in Hebrew noi sukkah, the decorations of the sukkah, or literally the beautification of the sukkah. And the reason for that is because the decorations of a sukkah can, in many cases, take on some of the halachic restrictions that the walls themselves take on. So in our case, we've got posters and tinsel and all sorts of things. The fruit hanging down from the beams across the top. These have some of the halachic restrictions that are imposed on the walls themselves. For example, the laws of Muktzah as they apply to the days of Yom Tov. And this is quite different to other decorations that we have. The very concept, the very idea that we decorate sukkah is quite strange as well. It's not something we often do. If you think about, let's think of an example, Hanukkah. So yeah, we have very decorative menorahs, Chanukias. They have ones for the kids, and they make their own ones out of clay, and you can get some very ornate silver ones and so on. But those are the Chanukias. Those aren't the actual lights themselves. We don't go and paint the actual candles or the oil jars that we use. We don't, for example, on the shofar, we're not allowed to decorate a shofar. It needs to be a pure horn. I can't think of other examples of matzah. We don't draw patterns on the matzah or decorate it in any way or carve shapes into it. We don't do this for any other mitzvah. We don't decorate it in the same way that actually the decorations take on this intrinsic halachic status that the actual mitzvah itself, the walls of the sukkah, the actual components of the mitzvah take on themselves. And I wanted to look at why that is. But before I do, I want to talk about some issues going on, some observations that have been made as to the way our society has changed over the last sort of decade, if you like, compared to how things were, beforehand. And it's been observed by various sociologists, Christopher Lasch is one of them, many others, that when we've had times of economic exuberance, when, for example, the Industrial Revolution, when oil or gas or other resources were seen to be abundant, when we were seen to be having some sort of degree of control over nature, when society, technology, the economy was doing well, we could also see that in the way people behaved and in the way they dressed, in terms of their exuberance, the way they behaved. And it was very much more narcissistic in the way they acted as a result. And you can see the kind of link between those two. The psychology was that we're in control, we have the power, we have the dominance, and there was a lot of sense of me, the individual, being on top of things. Coupled with that was a power of consumerism. The idea that what we buy reflects who we are. And as a result of that, we've seen the jobs, for example, that involve caring for others as being looked down upon. So the caring profession, nurses, teachers have been undervalued in society as a result of that trend, because they kind of go against that narrative of the I, of the self. And this creates a kind of meaning crisis, because we're sort of focusing on ourselves, but we know there's a limit to what we can actually do. But we've also had times when resources have been relatively scarce or in decline. I know the cost of living crisis, inflation and so on have been greatly exacerbated over the last year or two. But let's not forget that inflation in this country certainly has been pretty much, well, I don't like to say out of control, but has been very high for the last decade. And during that time, we've almost seen a sort of flip of that narcissism. We've seen a flip from being sensed of sense entitlement and it's a sense of entitlement to a sense of victimhood. Because we don't want to acknowledge that there's anything that we can be doing better, that it's us. We want to take, it's much easier to take on the role of the victim and then sort of assign that sort of bully, if you like, label on those around us. What hasn't helped in all of this is we've had the rise of social media and these influencers and very, very rich people who are able to put out their messages showing their opulence, showing their wealth, in a way that hasn't been able to be communicated for any other time in history. So we're able to see all of this, see people making a lot of money through the internet, through various means. Some are easier to see than others, but not. And that kind of shows us up and doesn't do much for our own sense of worth and sense of well-being and our sense of accomplishment. After all, if you can make a lot of money on a OnlyFans site by taking your clothes off and getting paid to do it, really that kind of mentality doesn't reflect on those who are actually struggling to make ends meet and actually do worthwhile jobs that do benefit society and benefit those around us. So those two things have kind of come together, this idea of high profile communication, social media sharing, influencers with this high cost of living, and we've ended up with this resolution which isn't very helpful in my as far as I can see, of creating this sense of victimhood, of there's things that are wrong in my life and it's because of I'm being oppressed. All of that goes against what Judaism is about. Judaism is very much about human worth and about us having a sense of self, having a contribution to society and being able to make a difference. That's why we sit in the sukkah. We sit in the sukkah to take ourselves. The first thing we do, almost the first thing we do straight after Yom Kippur, is to say, okay, we're sorry. We're trying to make amends for all the things, all our shortfalls, all the ways we've gone astray and haven't behaved in the way we wanted to. Right, let's start afresh. Go outside of your comfort zone. Step outside of what you're used to, and let's start from here, because that way we can break with all the old habits and start afresh in the sukkah. But to do that, we've got to make the sukkah our own. We've got to decorate it. We've got to build it the way we want it to be. Now, yes, of course, there are halakhic restrictions on what a sukkah can be. There's a minimum size, there's a maximum size, the number of walls. There's what it can be made of, what it can't be made of, and the conditions on which you are allowed to sit in the sukkah as well. But we build that relationship, we design the sukkah, we put up our decorations, we personalize it, because this sukkah, for these 8 days, 7 or 8 days, represent our relationship with Hashem. This is where we're going to live now. This is where we're going to act out. And this is going to be the sort of template, if you like, for our lives. Because we're going to define our relationship. We're going to decorate it the way we want it to be. We're going to put into the building of the sukkah what we want in our own resources. And by doing that, we're showing our creativity, our innovation, within the confines of halakha. So, sukkahs, the reason why the decorations take on such a significance is because they're very much part of the sukkah. There are, in truth, very few rules. There are rules about the dimensions, about the structure, the layout, the construction of a sukkah, but there's not many of them. Most of the creativity comes from us, is left to us to decide. And that's why you go to different sukkahs and you see lots of different designs, lots of different layouts, lots of different decorations. Because that's us putting ourselves into our sukkah, making it of our own. We're using our resources not to satisfy ourselves, not putting ourselves and our egos at the center of the equation, but we're using our resources to define our relationship with God and to give our lives that extra bit of meaning. And by doing that, we're on a much healthier, much more meaningful way of life. Chag Sameach.